Hello, everybody. Apologies for the wait. I suddenly was very tired about an hour or an hour and a half ago, and it really slowed down my prep for this live. I had a bagel with peanut butter and jelly, and gluten always knocks me out. So maybe it was that. Maybe my sleep hasn't been as good recently. But we're here now, and so this is a follow up to the live that I did on Tuesday. I'm Sammy Dalati, by the way, the senior editor at the magazine Antiques. The live I did on Tuesday discussing the cocktail hour for the honorary committee of Salon Art and Design. Whew, that's a lot to say. Salon Art and Design is a fair at the Park Avenue Armory running from yesterday to the 14th, which is Monday. And I was on the floor yesterday during the press preview to get a first look at a lot of the work that I'd maybe gotten a sense of from the cocktail hour, but was still mostly surprised by. So as you can tell, I'm doing it a little bit differently this time around. I'm not in my get up from yesterday, uh, which was a Canadian tuxedo. Um, so this isn't a complete recreation, but I still would hope to paint something of a picture of what the press preview and opening night were like, along with some more details about specific pieces encountered in the show. And I want to start off with a quote, which is to wit to that goal. And that is, for truth to be beautiful, it must be complete, the full and final truth. That's by Robert Adams from Beauty in Photography, published in 1981. And I'll come back around to that at the end of this live. But let's jump right in because there is a lot to cover. So Salon Art and Design runs every year at the Park Avenue Armory. I took the train from where I live in Brooklyn all the way up to the Upper East Side. And it's interesting as you get closer to the Armory, you start to look around the train and wonder which well-dressed person is also heading there, whom you might meet later in the night, and whether instead of acting anonymous like we usually do on the train, you ought to start affecting some more important air. So the woman sitting across from me actually did end up at the fair. I didn't meet her. I don't know who she was. She was sitting in, I think it was Hostler Burroughs, on one of the sofas. Or no, it's Maison Girard, in Maison Girard. But she was the only one. She was the only one on the train that I saw going to my same destination. But I say this partially because it's an exciting event. The big openings at Park Avenue Armory, the winter show, which is the magazine Antiques, main gig. It used to be called the Winter Antiques Show. Will be happening in January, and there's always a special energy in the air for that show and for any big show happening at the Park Avenue Armory. I mean, all of New York society, upper crust society, turns out, and the beautiful furniture and design and art are matched by the equally beautiful people in their equally beautiful dress. So you go through the big wooden doors, and once I collected my press ticket, I went onto the main floor. In order to get there, you pass by Amy Lau's display. Unfortunately, I was unable to speak with her. Amy Lau is an interior designer. She is appearing on an upcoming episode of TMA Explains, written by our very own Mateo Solis Prada, which gets into the well, it's kind of an etymological question. Uh, I hope that sounds interesting. It is an interesting video, um, but it digs into the credenza form and the difference between a credenza and a sideboard and buffet and what have you. And it's a surprisingly complicated distinction or complicated history, which takes us around from Britain to Italy. We touch on nobles being poisoned at table by their enemies, uh, Catholic Mass, and Amy Lau was able to disambiguate um, some of the confusion that surrounds the credenza form. So be looking for that. Anyway, all that to say, Amy Lau is showing right when you go in the fair, and off in one of the wings. I also did not visit this gallery, but DDA is in one of the wings near coat check, and I didn't go partially because I always visit their booth, and I love it. I recommended it to someone later that night at a subsequent party that I went to. Um, they show usually, I mean, perhaps not the show, but usually or jewelry made by modern or 20th century artists. So you'd have what is it, coral lips and pearl teeth. I believe that's a brooch by Dali, and then pieces by Picasso, Brock, etc. And it's always fun to see what an artist we know so well does with in effect, tiny canvas like that, and working in metal, which might not be the usual medium. Um, anyway, on to the show floor, and my editor Greg Serio had been before, and of course the first place he mentioned visiting was Bernard Goldberg, uh, and Bernard Goldberg is one of the first galleries you encounter on the show floor. It's to your left. They have a double wide gallery, and at the very front is a stunning window display. It's stained glass, but in a very different style from Tiffany, John Lafarge, other stained glass you might see at, well, probably the Winter Show, for instance, at Lillian Nassau. Um, it was by Nicola Descenzo. I hope I'm getting that right. My foreign pronunciations leave a lot to be desired. And he was given a hero's welcome in Europe, in France in particular, where he studied the stained glass of cathedrals throughout the country, scaffolding be erected for him so that he could clamber up and take a close look at this rose window or this stained glass panel, for instance. And where Tiffany, for instance, was using what he called favrile glass, which is an opalescent glass. It's glass that is not uniform in color, texture, or transparency or translucence. This artist, I'll just call him Nicola because his first name is much easier to pronounce. Nicola used the style that would have been found in the Middle Ages instead, which meant simpler panels of distinctly colored pieces of glass combined to form party-colored arrangements without the gradations that you find in Tiffany, for instance. This particular example is called the Chestnut Street windows, and the designs he created for it were not specifically taken from European churches, though he would draw on source books used in the creation of those churches when he did church commissions, but instead uses a vocabulary of forms that he created himself. Anyway, very impressive. I talked to Kat, a nice young man at the gallery who was able to give me all this information, but don't miss it. I doubt you'd be able to. It's huge. Next, I was on to the Future Perfect, and if you're in the antiques world, you might want to cover your ears because the centerpiece of their booth was an antique armoire that had been painted. So this is something you see happening in the Northeast of the United States and elsewhere, I'm sure, where people will find antiques at flea markets or whatever else, and then cover them with milk paints. And purists would call this sacrilege, of course. It's a slightly different context with the piece at Future Perfect. It's by a duo called Freeling Waters. One is a calligrapher, the other is a muralist. And they got their start, actually, doing murals. They've also had a collaboration with the fashion designer Dries Van Noten. And then they moved into furniture. And they've limited themselves to armoires at this point. And I looked at some of their other work, and the example on view at the Future Perfect is probably one of the more subdued examples. Examples I saw online are often much more vivid and evoke Cuba cloth to my eye, which is the Belgian cloth that's been adopted as a continental symbol, I guess you'd say, in Africa. But the example that was on view at the Future Perfect at Salon had stippling on the inside, multicolored stippling, reminiscent of folk art from the United States, also perhaps of the interior of the house of the Rhinestone Cowboy, which if any of you are interested in folk art, you might be familiar with. A portion of his house has been installed recently in Sheboygan, Michigan, at the Kohler Art Preserve. And if any of you have not heard of the Kohler Art Preserve, that's certainly something to check out. It's a bit out of the way for viewers in New York, but we're on YouTube. You could be anywhere. If you're near Sheboygan, check it out. I wrote about it for the magazine a couple of years ago. If you go to our website, you can find that article. Fascinating place. So moving on, near Future Perfect was Converso, owned by Lawrence Converso, based in Chicago. But I didn't see Lawrence Converso at first. I first saw a man who I could only remember it when I first saw him as Graham. We looked at each other like, do I know you? Do you know me? Which is pretty common at fairs like these, where, especially because of COVID, I haven't seen a lot of faces in a couple of years. I've met people. I've gotten people's names. We may have even collaborated on an article or something like that. And yet, when I re-encounter them, I go blank. Anyway, Michael Converso is the gallery director. And the reason I know him is because he was my cicerone when I wrote an article for Modern magazine a couple years ago called Design Destination, that took Chicago as the design destination under discussion. He took me all around the city. I'm endlessly grateful for him reintroducing me to the city I was born in, but in a way didn't know until I went on that trip. I didn't grow up in Chicago, so maybe it's more excusable than uh, than it would be if I spent any adult years in Chicago. Um, and I think that was specifically the case for Chicago because you have a few artistic centers, but the main one, which is the only one that any tourists coming into the city would visit, is the downtown one, centered around the Art Institute, Millennium Park, um, maybe the Museum of Contemporary Art if you go a little further north. Michael, Graham, however, it took me much further afield. Uh, we went to visit Theaster Gates on the south side. Uh, as we were walking there, we were told our guide, who was Norman Teague, and I'll get to him a bit later, was told by another man we encountered to get these white boys out of here. Um, but undaunted, we continued and made our way to Theaster Gates's studio, which was fascinating, um, and I'm very grateful to Michael for everything he was able to show me in the city, and it was great catching up with him. The centerpiece of their booth is a suite of furniture by Bruce Goff. It is the only suite by Goff in existence, or whose whereabouts are known. Goff will be having a retrospective at the Art Institute in 2025. He was someone whose name was new to me. He was Nebraskan based, a child prodigy, was corresponding with Frank Lloyd Wright by the time he was 14, and has a style somewhat similar to Wright's. The suite of furniture was geometrical, a roughly circular table surrounded by geometrical stools. Above this piece was hanging a Bertoia sculpture. Looked like an inverted fountain. Threads of metal hanging down from the ceiling. And then, getting back to it, Norman Teague, who has really popped off in the last year, now collected by something like 15 museums. He's a designer. Had a bookcase that's in the form of a snake crawling up a tree. It's a zigzag made from cabinetry from foreclosed houses in Chicago. And the snake crawling up a tree motif is something to be found in West African textiles. Now, something I'd seen on social media in the lead up to the fair was the construction of a tower at R and Company. R and Company is actually in two places on the show floor. And this tower is in one of the corners. It's so there are a few pieces. There are eye catchers within booths, and then there are eye catchers on the floor as a whole. And I might compare this tower, which is called Tower for an Hour at R and Company, as akin to a folly, which is a term in landscape architecture for an eye-catching structure built into the landscape. For instance, you'd have in the English tradition maybe some faux ruins of a Gothic or classical Gothic church or classical temple on some hilltop to draw your eye up to that hill. And in the same way, in the landscape of the of Salon Art and Design on the what's the name, the drill floor of Salon Art Design. That's the main space at the Park Avenue Armory. In that landscape, pieces like Tower for an Hour are like these follies, which catch your eye from many galleries away and draw you toward them and past them and deeper into the booths. So Tower for an Hour is like a playful take on a 19th century industrial structure. It reminds me of something photographed by Bernton Hillenbecher, whose show just closed at the Metropolitan Museum of Art a couple days ago. If you were lucky enough to be able to see it, good for you. I was not able to, very sad, but I did write about it. Sorry to plug myself again, but you can also find that story on magazineantiques.com. Tower for an Hour is metal, blue, green, and red, riveted. You can go inside it. I'm going to read a little bit from the statement of the artist to better. Some flash media easily find pictures of. Tower for an Hour presented here invites viewers to question the built environment, the interplay and interior spaces, and the convergence of experience and function. This 22-foot tall structure offers a space for reflection, rest, and play, transporting those that engage with it to a new and exciting realm. I did not go inside, so I can't vouch for whether it truly would have transported me to some new realm, but I don't doubt it, especially if you've got an imagination. The setting it was in was also attractive. It was a gallery, completely lined, floor and walls, no ceiling, with blue velvet set off against the mostly green tower. Nearby, there was another of these design follies, if we're calling them that. And I don't mean that in a pejorative way. It's a landscape design term, landscaping term for an eye-catching element in the landscape, a folly. And this is something that I mentioned in my talk on Tuesday. It was at the Gallery Otra. And it's an 8-foot floor mirror. It kind of looks like a giant pop socket. Solid walnut. Looks like stacked lamination. And I took one selfie in front of it. I guess I could have made that the thumbnail instead of the thumbnail that I ended up using, but I'm not the best hand at selfie photography, so I didn't. But that also is something that's been splashed across social media. Everybody's taking selfies in front of that sculpture. I unfortunately did not get to reconnect with Maddie and the gallery's owner, who I had met at Apparatus on Monday, but they were surrounded by gaggles of fans, so good for them. There are a few galleries that, in a way, they're double size. It's the space of two galleries, and when you do that, then it creates a window from one hall in the space to another. And so these galleries are twice as big as most of the galleries, and then can also be used if you don't like the row you're going down, you can walk through one of these galleries and head into the next row. I'm not sure if the gallery owners love that, if you don't look at their work as well, but I was drawn into the gallery of Hostler Burroughs by a very strange piece, which really just looked like a window. So you've got a double wide gallery, and then apparently you get windows if you have these double wide galleries, which is actually something that one of the galleries at the Winter Antique Show always does is they have these double height arched windows. Um, it's inset into their booths. Um, but these were not windows. These were sculptures by Anne Lykke, and if I'm mispronouncing that, that's Ane, first name, last name Lykke. I might describe them as louver art, reminiscent of louvers used to great effect by architects to control lighting effects in rooms. Um, these were wood paneled with they looked like halogen lights set into the sides of the frame so that the lighting effect could be controlled. Uh, this is another thing. It wouldn't photograph very well. It's something that you almost have to see there. The gallery had two of them. And as I was talking to a gallery rep, then a collector came by asking to purchase something else in the booth. And so one thing you have to remember about this sort of show is there's a particular pecking order. So collectors come first and press second. And so if a collector has a question about something, then the gallery rep will immediately attend to that, and the poor journo is left to retreat and lick his wounds of wounded vanity. But actually didn't happen too many times. And I didn't get as much information about this piece as I would have liked, but that's sometimes how it goes at these shows. And you can always go back and check the website for more information. And it creates sort of an impetus to return, which I hope I'll be able to do this weekend. Okay, so next across the hall was Gallery All, and I ended my live on Tuesday by referencing something that a gallery rep from Gallery All, which I misidentified as Gallery O. If you wonder why I keep doing this, it's because when I move, it resets my lighting to focus on the light behind me instead of on my face. So sometimes I just have to wave my hand or my shoulder to reset it. Anyway, I couldn't remember her name, the woman I talked to. Very sad. She said she was from, she lived in Milan, working at a gallery that is based in LA and is the leading gallery in Shanghai, Gallery All. She's from Mexico City, but New York is the vibe because everyone's so friendly. You can meet all kinds of people. And I've met her and I forgot her name. But I learned it last night, and it's Mariana. And so I was able to see a few other things that they had on view at their booth. The most noteworthy of which, to my mind, was something called Another View. And it was a looping 24-hour shot of downtown Milan. And you can actually see Mariana make out with her boyfriend at a certain point in the loop because she knew it was going to be going on. So you never know what you'll see on this sort of thing. And I talked to, it's created by 3 artists. And I talked to Robert Ancreson. The other artists are Marco DeBasso and Tatiana Vaslova. And they've done a whole series of these Another View. This one was set in Milan. They've done one in Botswana looking at lions and other wildlife. They'd like to do one in Mexico City. And the pieces are displayed like windows. They're basically large screen TVs or displays set on their side. So instead of a 16:9 ratio, you have a 9:16. It's profile instead of landscape orientation. And then there are glass shutters that could close in the video screen on both sides. Um, it's it was described to me as, you're in New York, you're at Salon Art and Design, but then here is a view into Milan, or here is a view to Botswana. And it made a nice, there's a nice connection between that and the work in Hostler Burroughs, which I had mistaken for a window, I suppose. Um, and I also met a Russian artist named Inga Kuryeva. She's a painter. She was also in this gallery. She came up and talked to Robert and I as we were talking, and she had a different way of describing her work than what I'm about to say. But I can't remember. I can't remember the full version of what she called it. It was something that she'd come up with herself. But her work has been billed as surrealist, and you can see that it's a little maybe more naive looking than most surrealist art. Very bright colors, and she is from Saransk in Russia, even though she's been in New York for about 10 years. And Saransk is notable as the location of Mordovian prison, which is where Pussy Riot was locked up. And Inga had the very droll, very it seems characteristically Russian idea to do another view, like an installation of another view, where one side is looking into the prison and another side is looking into an animal shelter. So basically, you'd have a 24-hour loop of an animal shelter installed in the prison, and then a 24-hour loop of the prison installed in an animal shelter, because Moving on, I visited Clove Studio, which is based in New Delhi, and they had 3 wall-mounted lighting installations. It's a lighting-focused gallery, and these were made out of hand-blown glass and metal, and drew their symbolism from cultures all over the world. They stood for each stood for something different: protection, abundance, and beauty. And they're called totems over time. These I have not seen a lot of on social media. I wonder if it's because they're somewhat hard to photograph. But if you're at the show, definitely check them out. They're in one of the corners, and they're different from almost everything else on the show floor. Nearby there was a gallery, and this is the only gallery that I failed to write down the name of, but I noticed a piece of furniture, a piece of cabinetry against one of the walls, and asked the one of the reps, or the owner, named Nancy. She was Lebanese. What she would call this piece. And it was kind of not a trick question, but it's like motivated reasoning or something like that. I had an ulterior motive asking her to name this piece, and not the title of the piece, but just the type of piece. She said it's a credenza, and I said, "Oh, not a buffet or a sideboard?" She said, "No, it's a sideboard." So this is kind of what the answer you get when you ask gallerists. Sorry, this was a connection to what I said earlier about the video that we're putting out about credenzas and how they relate to sideboards and buffets and whatever else. And often the answer you'll get from people when you ask them to describe a credenza versus a sideboard, a buffet, or other piece of furniture that fits against the wall like that, um, is a very firm affirmative, and then you're left to deal with the contradictions. But I'd be happy to go with credenza equals sideboard based on her confidence. It was made out of caviuna wood, which, along with jacaranda, are the most commonly used woods in Brazilian furniture. Both are now protected species, so it's only old pieces of furniture that can be sold, and only old pieces of wood, salvaged or whatever else, that can be used in new furniture. This piece was by Peter Kraft, and I'd estimate it was 15 or 20 feet wide or long. It was a very impressive credenza or sideboard. Across from them, I made an interesting connection. So, if you follow the magazine Antiques at all, you'll know that we are knee deep in a new season of Curious Objects, which is hosted by Benjamin Miller, who is the director of research at SJ Shrubsole, the silver dealer. They are not at Salon Art and Design. They will be at the Winter Show. They currently, I believe, are in Delaware, actually. And Benjamin Miller's sister works for Yves Cousteau, which is the gallery across from the gallery that had the credenza. And so I had to meet her because I've worked with Ben for almost 6 years at this point. And I was looking into the gallery, and I had sort of throughout the night I'd been trying not to check my phone because I'd written down the name of the gallery, but I was like, I know it's Yves something, and there are a few galleries there that are, have French tiles that are somewhat similar, and I'd look at the gallery reps and see, does this woman look like Ben's sister? And finally, I hit the right one, and so I got to meet her. Very nice. She's been working at the gallery for 3 years, but you'd think 30 because her French is perfect, even though she is like Ben from Tennessee, and she was able to be voluble, knowledgeable about all of the work and all of its history in the gallery. It's I've always been a bit curious about what leads people to this world, and particularly to becoming dealers, unless it's the family business, and that's not the case for Ben or his sister. And so I asked Eva, which is Ben's sister's name, uh, to explain that, and she said, both of their parents are musicians, and it comes down to searching for beauty, wanting to be around beauty, to know about beauty. And Ben found his way into dealing first, and then, somewhat influenced by his path, she found her way into it somewhat later. And she's in more modern 20th century based line of work. He is in, of course, a few centuries earlier with the silver that he deals. But there's still plenty of history in the works that Yves Cousteau deals in. So the first thing that caught my eye was a console by Ettore Sottsass from the 80s, original. And then the next thing were a series of metal sculptures of animals. There was what looked like a wolf, a deer, and some sort of large ground bird. There was also a lamp. And they are by Balthus's daughter. Her name is Harumi Klosowska. Harumi grew up in the Villa de Medici, which her father was running when she was growing up. And of course, as the daughter of a famous artist, you don't need to care so much about whether your work is art or design or craft or whatever else. And so these animal forms worked both as sculpture and as furniture. The deer and the wolf had flat backs, one at the height of a sideboard, and you could sit on them probably, or put something on them, and that worked perfectly fine. Or you could look at them just as sculptures, and that also would work perfectly fine. She's influenced by Egyptian motifs, and there were gold leaf details on the sculptures in certain places. Sort of looked like bands around appendages, sort of like gold armbands or something, or gold detailing around the eyes, like eyeliner. The wolf I found particularly appealing. It reminded me a little of drawings or etchings by Kiki Smith, the same sort of subdued animality, not the gorgeous and triumphant roaring lion, but the wolf caught in a contemplative moment. There was a third artist represented, Raymond Delamere, one of the kings of Art Deco. And on view were three plaster maquettes covered with, I think, gold leaf. Yeah, gold leaf patina that were the made for the sculptures atop the Palace de Chalet in Paris. And they stood for the pillars of knowledge, philosophy, wisdom, and liberal arts. So we have another trinity to go with the trinity at Clove. They weren't so massive as figures by Botero, but they certainly were getting close to socialist realism in their dimensions. These were stout, strong-looking human figures. And let's see, I'm almost at the end here. I think there's just one more gallery that I'm going to go through. So I mentioned, or if I failed to mention on Tuesday, that I ran into Jennifer Norton, who used to be the director of sales at Antiques. I'm terribly sorry for that, Jennifer. But she is now the director at 21st Gallery, based in New York. And that was the last gallery on my that I visited that night. And I was drawn in by a chandelier that Edgar Greg Serio had noticed when he'd been there earlier. It's made of cut glass, And let me see if I have particular details. The artist is Natalie Ziegler Pasquet, Pas, Pasqua, I suppose. Uh, and it's um, it's a pretty classical overall form, I suppose, but the made entirely from what almost look like jigsaw cut uh, pieces of Parisian glass that are then melded together in this agglomeration of shimmering colors and reflections. I might say, however, that what struck me the most in that gallery was the work of Marcin Rusak, a Polish, Warsaw based designer who, whose family has been growing flowers for 3 generations. And so he had on display 2 pieces, a high cabinet and a coffee table, which were made of resin impregnated with dried flowers, which kept their color, by the way. And I talked to Esme, the wife of Renaud, the gallery's owner, and particularly about the coffee table. It's black, like a Northern Renaissance painting, as Jennifer brought up, with details of flowers impregnated in this darkness. And Esme said it reminded her of the poem Ophelia by Rimbaud. So I'm going to read that poem. The calm black water where the stars are sleeping, white Ophelia floats like a great lily, floats very slowly, lying her long veils. In the far-off woods, you can hear them sound the mort. For more than 1,000 years, sad Ophelia has passed, a white phantom, down the long black river. More than 1,000 years, her sweet madness has murmured its ballad to the evening breeze. The wind kisses her breasts and unfolds beneath her great veils, rising and falling with the waters. The shivering willows weep on her shoulder, the rushes lean over her wide, dreaming brow. The ruffled water lilies are sighing around her. At times she rouses in a slumbering alder, some nest from which escapes a small rustle of wings. A mysterious anthem falls from the golden stars. O pale Ophelia! Yes, child, you died, carried off by a river. It was the winds descending from the great mountains of Norway that spoke to you in low voices of better freedom. It was a breath of wind that, twisting your great hair, brought strange rumors to your dreaming mind. It was your heart listening to the song of nature. It was the voice of mad seas, the great roar, that shattered your child's heart, too human and too soft. It was a handsome, pale knight, a poor madman, who one April morning sat mute at your knees. Heaven, love, freedom! What a dream, oh poor crazed girl! You melted to him as snow does to a fire. Your great vision strangled your words, and fearful infinity terrified the blue eye. And the poet says that by starlight you come seeking, in the night, the flowers that you picked, and that he has seen on the water, lying in her long veils, white Ophelia floating like a great lily. So Esme asked me why I do what I do, which is learn and write about art. She said that she's the kind of person who asks hard questions. And it did stump me. But I thought about it and figured that it was probably coming out of a pursuit of at least two of the three transcendentals. That by recording the world accurately, we arrive at truth, and by concerning myself with beautiful objects and trying to write in a way that is itself beautiful, we achieve beauty. So I would encourage you to check out Salon Art and Design for more beauty. It's open till Monday, and there is much to see, much more than I could possibly summarize in even if I were to stay on for an hour. I see we're at 51 minutes here. Um, if anyone has any questions about the fair or anything else, I'd be happy to answer them. Um, I know that if you watched my previous stream, you might not want to hear this again, but I'll just remind you that we have a new issue of the magazine that just came out, our November December issue. We also have a video that just came out on Bronzino's allegory of Venus and Cupid, which you can find on our YouTube channel. We will have more coverage of Salon Art and Design coming on Instagram. And of course, Curious Objects continues for the next month or so with stories about Belisaire and the Frey children, a rediscovered piece of Louisiana history, as well as Shakers and Shakerism and their furniture, and then finally a new painting by Paul Gauguin. So stay tuned with all we've got coming up. It's been it's a lot coming out. All right, if there are no questions, then I'm going to be signing off. Okay, I don't see anything yet. Well, good night to everyone. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll talk to you again soon.